regions slightly adjusted. I think to make this a little bit easier to connect in the combo.
I've got a gift for you.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Chamber of the Wraith. My name is Brian, and today we're going to be tackling a brand new series here on the Chamber of the Wraith. I said that twice back-to-back already. Whoops. Okay, so today we're going to be tackling Godzilla Save the Earth, and more specifically, its combat mechanics. And this is going to be part of a 19-part series. I almost said 20, but I decided that I'm going to lump two monsters into one, because they share the same slot, and that works well enough for me. So, very quickly, I'm going to give an overview while all of these logos for these lovely folks join in. And as a quick announcement, at the end of the series, like I usually do at the end of series thingies, I will be playing the credits, because everybody who developed these games needs to be credited for their work. So, since I'm using the games, Godzilla! Makes perfect sense for this Godzilla game, among all others. But while this sweet intro movie plays out in full, I'm going to explain the full point of this series. The point of this series in full is that I wanted to kind of dive deep into Godzilla Save the Earth for years now. And now that I have the recording capabilities, I'm able to do so. However, it makes sense that before we start jumping into the whole monster breakdown and crazy tier list strategy, whatnot, you would need to know the mechanics of this game first, which is very important because knowing the mechanics of any fighting game is going to help determine who you want to play as. And Godzilla Save the Earth is unlike any traditional fighting game ever. It really is just like the rest of its siblings, Godzilla Destroy All Monsters Melee and Godzilla Unleashed, but is the best of the bunch, so it figures makes sense to start here with the 2004 cult classic, Godzilla Save the Earth. Now, I'm actually going to skip the rest of the intro movie because I talk about it a little bit in my deep dive, alongside this cool little feature which lets you move the submarine around Godzilla pretty surprisingly well. Now, before we get too deep into the mechanics, I need to do a quick overview on one thing and one thing primarily: the purchase items option, because you'll need to know that not everything is available from the start. In fact, 4 arenas and 6 monsters are what you get from the start. But as you'll soon see, you can unlock quite a bit more across the board. And if you're wondering why I have Gallery and Godzilla Final Wars things to unlock, even though I managed to show them all off, new computer, save data did not transfer, so I had to go and do this work all over again. Not that I mind, because any excuse to play Godzilla Save the Earth I'm happy to have. But with the monsters that you'll play as, and I think it actually makes sense to back out of the store and go right into Versus mode, where most of the demonstrations will take place. As a quick note, most of the demonstrations will be on easy, just because it's like the closest thing to a training mode this game has, and it will let you kind of get a feel for the mechanics that way, and I can actually show them all off without getting rudely interrupted all the damn time. Except for a few things where we will talk about them via medium mode. So, when you get Godzilla Save the Earth for the first time, you start with 6 monsters: Godzilla 2000, Godzilla 90s, Anguirus, Gigan, Megalon, and Rodan. And then each of the monsters that you unlock are part of packs. So you buy Monster Pack 1, you will unlock King Ghidorah, and then have these other evil monsters. You unlock Orga, then you get some new faces. Then you unlock Mechagodzilla 3, who I'm going to refer to from here on as Kiryu, and all of the other monsters from there. But to highlight the mechanics, let's just have a mirror match, because this also is going to doubly highlight the mechanics. And for this one, we're just going to do Godzilla 2000. The difference isn't huge, but it is worth noting. Your first 4 stages, if I recall correctly, are Tokyo, New York, San Francisco, and Osaka. No, wait. I don't remember your first 4 stages right off the top of my head, but I believe Monster Island is one of them. But as you expand and unlock arenas, you can see you get a lot, including one of the first arenas you can unlock, the boxing ring, which is where we will be visiting most of the time because there are fewer distractions online. So, let's give a more detailed control breakdown.
Godzilla 2000 versus Godzilla 2000.
See the color difference? What fun!
Monsters
Anyhow,
fight.
your basic controls are the left stick and the D-pad are to move around. Don't worry, we'll get to the breath attack soon. And you can use the buttons on the top of your controller in various ways. The left trigger, or L2 button, allows you to run if held with the movement option, and this can get you certain attack options. You can also press it to crouch and block. You automatically crouch block if you hold the L2 button. But as you've seen, overhead attacks will beat the block, but they will not. But interestingly, unlike normal blocking, which is done by pressing the triangle button, you can actually... oh, now we're getting grabbed. You can actually block from behind if you crouch, for the most part. I imagine that there's some funky stuff going on here, but that was probably done so you can block breath attacks, which we will get into soon. To grab, you press the L1 button and push either punch, which is the X button, kick, which is the square button. I'm using PlayStation controls for now because that's what that is what I'm emulating, but I'm going to refer to them as universal commands from here on, like punch, kick, and this one, fierce, which is the circle button. You'll notice that you actually don't do an immense amount of damage. Like, even your big launchers don't really do a massive amount of damage. This is a game about multiple hits, and it's a little bit drawn out. Now, for breath attacks, you can hold the R1 button to charge until it's full, and then unleash the full might of the attack. Or, you can release it at any time in order to unleash it. But regardless, it will always cost, well, almost always, there are special monster exceptions, but in most cases, it will cost 3 energy cells to fire a standard breath attack. You can also tap the button in order to get a secondary breath attack with most monsters, but it usually costs a sizable amount of energy, and isn't usually as good as your breath attack in general. But, if you don't have enough energy and you're just figuring out a new monster, there will always be that red marker in order to figure out how much energy you actually need. Your punch button, your kick button, and your fierce button all have different properties. Wake-up attacks, which this is a good time to talk about, are unblockable and usually have pretty good range and always knock down. So, don't be afraid to use wake-up attacks. You really don't get punished for it, at least at a very casual level. If a monster is going to go for a wake-up attack, though, you can jump by pressing the R2 button and attacking them with the jumping punch, because that's usually your overhead. You can use the directional buttons to get various attacks, which I will detail for each individual monster. So for instance, forward punch, and that's a good time to talk about one of the more random properties of this game. For some strange reason, some attacks at certain points will have a form of pseudo armor. Like, you will not flinch. I've not fully understood how this mechanic works, or if you can even trigger it by will. But I do know that it seems to happen more often on certain lunging attacks than it does for than for most other attacks. Generally, monsters have built-in strings into their punches. Punch, punch, punch for a little string. But the ender is always something else. So, there it is, a perfect example of what I was just talking about. I think it happens, the armor happens when the attacks hit at the same time, but it's weird. Anyway, up and kick for Godzilla 2000 versus is the bite that ends that particular string. You can even combine... Oh, looks like some attacks have a certain level of tracking. That's worth noting. Certain attacks can also come out as combinations. So punch, punch, kick becomes punch, punch. Oh, got to block. Hold on. Becomes the headbutt. If you press kick, kick, you get the overhead strike. The rule of thumb is that if you press a button, let's say we do kick, punch, kick. Or, I'm not sure if that works. Yeah, there we go. Kick, punch, kick. With a little bit of timing, you always get the headbutt. But if you do kick, kick, punch, you always get the big overhead swing with Godzilla 2000, as an example. That one. Which means you can do all kinds of tricky things with this in order to kind of get different attacks if you know what does what. But generally speaking, they're all attacks that you can just pull off naturally. So that stomp at the end of Fierce Kick, you can actually just get it with down and kick with Godzilla 2000 as an example. And generally the attacks are quite intuitive. Things like, you want to lunge forward, do forward and punch. You want to rush forward, forward and kick. There are some attacks that don't really make a lot of sense, like drop kick being back and kick, but generally speaking, if you use this as a rule of thumb, like, oh, where's the attack coming from? I do the thing with the punch, and then generally you'll get it figured out, and then whatever it isn't, 9 times out of 10 it'll work out just fine. I believe that covers most of the main combat mechanics that I can mention right now in the boxing ring, because... Oh, I could talk about reversal attacks, which is what I call it when your monster's back is to the opponent, which is usually a bad way, because even if you're blocking, almost all monsters will always be hit with by certain attacks. So while I'm not going to be able to show it off, apparently. Oh, there we go. See how I was still hit even though I was blocking? That's because my back was to the opponent while I was blocking. I actually have to face the opponent, unless it's a crouch block. But crouch blocks get beaten by overheads, which means cross-ups exist in Godzilla Save the Earth, even though there's no real way to jump over the opponent. But there's a couple of monsters that can take advantage of this mechanic that we'll get to when we get there. For now, we need to talk about the reversal attacks. So if your back is to the opponent, most monsters have at least one reversal attack, which is, again, what I'm calling an attack when your back is to the opponent. Godzilla 2000 always keeps its back to it, so you have to flick the left stick once you knock the opponent down to reface the opponent. But other monsters, like Gigan for instance, will actually automatically turn around and strike from behind and be able to reface the opponent so that they could go back on the defensive if need be. There is an interesting mechanic that is a little bit difficult to demonstrate on this particular arena. Oh, and but before we get to that, taunting! Taunting is a thing. If you press punch and fierce or kick and fierce at the same time, you will get taunts. So, yes, you can taunt your opponents, and you can also kind of beat them up while they're already down, if you're mean, like me. But we need to move on to a city arena to talk about more of the mechanics, because while I'm reasonably confident that if Godzilla Save the Earth ever somehow gets an esports scene, it would almost always take place in the boxing ring, perhaps for variety's sake, some of the cities will take place. And I think for this one, we're going to be tackling a different monster. Let's do Anguirus versus... Actually, no, let's not do Anguirus. Let's do Rodan versus Megalon. Two of the weakest monsters defensively. And we will take this fight to one of the non-boxing ring arenas. One of the colossal arenas. Let's go to Seattle. Now, These arenas are all considerably larger than the boxing ring, so you'll be able to see the maximum range that you can flee towards,
Rodan.
and be able to talk about various power-ups.
Megalon.
And the reason why I picked these monsters is because,
Monsters. Fight.
like most of the other monsters, they have unique abilities. And there's also this barrier thing. But, as you can see, first we have to talk about power-ups. The summon, or the Atari symbol, will summon one of two monsters, or one of two entities to help you out. Now we're at maximum range. You can see it's quite ridiculous. But I flew right into a barrier. So, let's take stock of what those assists are. Here's one, Super X3, capable of freezing or blasting monsters. Especially helpful in situations like this. Hang on, I need to like corner trap him so I can demonstrate. Come on. It's a little bit tricky to demonstrate in this particular situation, but while I'm at it, you can actually grab energy power-ups, which speed up your energy regain, which both speed up your energy regain and your overall movement speed very slightly. The energy regain is considerably quite fast, but your movement speed goes up just a little bit. Okay, let's try this again. Combos. You can juggle the opponent for a short period of time, but I found that for the vast majority of cases, you will almost always only get 3 hits before they're done. Rage powers up your attacks by about 20-25% in that range, and will give you access to your super move, and also increases knockback. As you can see, when you start flashing, use Punch plus Fierce in order to unleash your super attack. Most of them are quite underwhelming, but the reason why I also picked these two is because, like most monsters, and unlike the Godzillas, you can actually use special abilities by pressing both of the triggers at the same time. Megalon's is to dig, which then allows him to either move around a lot or throw the opponent right from it, but if he goes for a throw from underground, it actually will stun him if he misses, as you've seen several times. Rodan's is considerably less spectacular. It's a fancy aerial maneuver that lets him dodge many breath attacks and then go into a flight stance, which flight is the actual reason why you would want to pick up Rodan. Flight is fantastic because it allows you to move around, and while it does drain energy, Rodan in particular is really good at this because his energy does not drain right away. And in the previous game, Godzilla Destroy All Monsters Melee, Rodan can actually stay in the air indefinitely by mashing Punch while he's in this aerial state. That's not true anymore, but he can still fly and gain energy for a few seconds in case he needs to make a quick getaway or protect a power-up of any kind. Next, let's talk about building throwing.
Monsters.
You can pick up buildings by pressing the grab button near any building that flashes red. Rodan generally does it from the air, most monsters do it from the ground. And then, of course, you can throw them at monsters in order to inflict damage. But if a monster decides to throw a building at you, you can catch it out of the air by pressing the grab button while the building is coming at you. You can also do things like throw monsters into buildings or strategically destroy buildings in order to have the buildings collapse on monsters for a little extra damage. Of course, not all buildings can be picked up, at least normally. Godzilla Destroy All Monsters Melee allowed you to do crazy things like have a cheat code that allows you to pick up whatever building you want, which is hilarious when you're doing things like picking up the Empire State Building. See how the Space Needle knocked me down because I was too close to it when I was falling down? That's something you can take full advantage of. And if you ever get grabbed, you can mash all the face buttons in order to wrestle free from a grab. You can even mash out of grabs almost immediately because of this if you expect it to happen. If you don't expect it to happen, there's a guaranteed chance that once the monster is picked up, you can just mash whatever button you want in order to get a throw that you want. You can also, by the way, manually aim the beam by by moving the right analog stick. Oh, now we get into beam locks, which we will probably talk about a little more in detail. But essentially what happens is you get one of 3 buttons to press. Fierce, or punch, fierce, or block. And they each correspond to different colors of the beam attacks. So, because it's on PlayStation 2, the X button, which is your punch button, is blue, then fierce is red, then block is green. Or, as I used to call it when I was a kid, alpha, beta, gamma. Or I think it was alpha, gamma, omega. Either way. Punch, and it becomes a game of rock, paper, scissors. You can press punch, which is blue, but fierce beats punch. Block beats fierce, but block is beaten by punch. But the tricky element comes for the fact that you can actually change the colors of the beam attacks mid sequence once per button press. So you could go from green to orange to red or to blue, but you won't be able to go from green to orange to green to orange to green and so on. And eventually, whoever wins the beam fight will do massive damage to the opponent for this game and knock them down. And the loser will lose all of their energy as well. If a monster is impacted during a beam lock, say during a melee mode, both monsters will take half the damage that they would take if they lost the beam fight and get knocked down. I think that about covers it for all of the core mechanics of fighting in this game. Because we actually got a beam fight on easy, so I don't actually have to worry too much. From here on in, we will be breaking down each monster individually. So we will be taking a look at things like special attacks, unique abilities, rage attacks, and even their stats, which is going to be the thing we're going to close out on today. Because each monster has its own stats. Let's take Godzilla 2000, for example. 5 out of 8 attack, 4 out of 8 defense, 5 out of 8 speed, 4 out of 8 weapons, which is generally breath attacks. You can see what kind of attacks Godzilla 2000 can inflict, what he resists, and what he's weak to. There are type matchup elements involved in this. And some monster stats, they could get a little bit ridiculous. But that is for when we cross over into the character-specific breakdowns in this game. Hopefully you enjoyed this little breakdown. I'm very excited to be doing more of these. And we will be following the order of up, down, left, right. So up, then down, left, or up, down, left, up, right, down, and so on. So we'll be cycling through the monsters this way until we get to the end. And we're going to have something very special for this particular monster indeed. So, don't forget to be awesome, my friends, and I'll see you guys on the other side.